I say it often, but it's a shame not a lot of people are checking out this new Blade the Immortal anime. Now, granted, I know as an adaptation it may not be what a lot of manga readers are looking for, but for people who've never experienced it like myself, this anime is doing a lot right for me, and I have to say, this episode, without a doubt, was my favorite of the six so far. I thought it was actually quite nice to finally get a really good Rin-focused episode where, for the most part, she was holding her own and really kind of portraying herself as being more than just a tag-along who would get emotional or would need to be saved. You can argue she did get saved, but I mean, this was really her episode in time to shine and kind of showed her resolve in a very human light. This whole idea of revenge is definitely unhealthy, but what would you do after seeing what happened to your father and seeing your mother defiled in the way that she was? Revenge and resentment would be all on your mind. But to see her come face to face with one of the people who defiled her mother, who hurt her family, but she's willing to give the benefit of the doubt because the current man that she sees is not the man that she saw in the past. It's someone who's keeping that dark history away from his son and trying to live a normal life, and nothing about this is what he was in the past. It's not because she wants this man to be happy, but she wants his child to. And that's something that I think is going to maybe go underappreciated by some, but it is very, very good writing. Because she knows what happened to herself. She is so broken and destroyed that she actually has to just keep walking a blood-shedding path. And that's not good, that's not healthy, but she doesn't want the same thing to happen to this child, because should she kill his father, he's just going to walk the path of finding his father's killer. And that's what's super great about this episode, is that it's not going the path of like forgiving and forgetting. No, you can't do that after what's happened in your past. However, when you see a child who could easily become you definitely want to protect that. And I thought that was actually exceptionally well done, especially seen by after the man's death. Manji is the same way. He lets the kid think that he killed his father's killer. And of course, that's not going to be enough, and he's willing to cut off his own arm and bury it so the child wouldn't walk and just try to kill him. The idea of salvaging the soul in this way was something that really hit me more than I thought it would. Because I'll be honest, I thought it was pretty clear that the man we got introduced to who was making masks and things like that, it was going to be attached to Rin's past, and I wasn't sure how connected and how much he would do that would be creepy or bad, but the idea of this like death mask and how he would paint over them and just it's pretty damn disgusting, but I guess in this time period, everyone has a weird code that makes their vile acts not seem as vile and lets them pass on. I mean, when Rin was witnessing what was happened to her mother, one was actually covering her up. I mean, that never should have happened, but it does show you that in some weird and twisted way, what these people do, it almost feels like that's just the time period, and they've all convinced themselves that this is what has to happen, though a child shouldn't bear witness to it. It's like, this series gives you a content warning before an episode starts off, and they definitely live up to that content warning. This is something that can actually disturb you. There's plenty of points where there's sexual assault and very violent assault, and it's actually realistically portrayed in my honest opinion. Such as that scene when Rin was helping the boy because he was about to get killed because he ruined a sandal, and the man was basically feeling her up with his feet, and she had to just bear it because she didn't have the strength to both protect herself and this boy, so she just had to deal with it and bite her tongue. Like, it's definitely at times a disturbing series, but that's what I appreciate about it, is that you're portraying this very brutal era, and they're not shying away from what men and just people would do in general during this time period, and how they would take what's theirs, and in the middle of victory, they would do horrible things to the women. It's like, it's definitely disturbing, and that's what makes Blade the Immortal, at least this version that I'm currently watching, something that truly grips me, because it makes me feel things. It makes me feel disturbed and in awe of what they're able to do with their writing, especially seen by this man's death. I was actually quite happy that this man actually kept to his beliefs, that you can't just ask for forgiveness and that's gonna be good. Like, there's no way your heart could truly be mended by me bowing down and saying, I apologize. Like, what would that truly do? From Rin's perspective, she just wants it to make sure that he's not going to continue on that he truly values his son's current way of life the most. And it makes sense for her, but for this warrior and what we've seen from warriors in this time period, I wouldn't understand how he could just bow and kind of forgive and forget in that way. Like, I would understand keeping his son safe and wanting him to survive, but at the same time, it just feels like from what we've seen with this clan, that's not what any of them would do. even if they do have a normal life at this point in time. And that's super great to me. I actually really appreciate what they did with this episode, and I expect a lot of the people who have maybe been a little iffy with the animation and presentation of the series up to this point probably will enjoy the action scene in this episode, as they didn't do too many of the more artistic cuts away that we have been kind of used to in this series up to this point. What they actually did was pretty smoothly animated and keeping everything in the focus, and just the brutality of that very short but sweet fight was actually, I'd maybe even go as far to say it was my favorite fight, because just the idea of the brutality and the stabbing and just the way ultimately Manji won, it was actually pretty clever, because we knew that he came up through the window, but we didn't know if he had any weapons by the windowsill or things like that. So the fact that he won just because of something that he forgot and realized that he had there, and a man who didn't kind of predict that, I thought it was a pretty satisfying death, just because this man can't die, right? Unless you're really cutting him up properly, Manji isn't gonna die, and this man is a proud warrior. So unless we stab him, it's just going to be a stalemate most likely, and then Rin would end up dead, Manji would heal, and then what would we have at that point in time? Pretty disgusting stuff, especially seen by the boy would have entered the room minutes later and he would have saw what his father did, right? So the fact that he was able to kill him that way and actually spare the boy's life was something I quite appreciated. It kind of felt like this episode was probably the strongest structured. Now, granted, I don't read the manga, right? So I don't know if this was very rushed or anything like that. But for me, this had the tightest pacing that I witnessed in Blade of the Immortals, the ONA for 2019 up to this point. I think the big reason was that it was a very focused episode. It was very condensed on what it wanted to tell. It set us up with Manji in this mass kind of crater and what he was doing in his honor with kind of like painting and kind of giving life to something in a pretty brutal way. Like, the episode literally starts off with him cutting his hand and painting a mask for a boy who says it's weird but then takes the mask. Like, this was clearly not someone who was a completely righteous person. He was fine with blood. Granted, it was his own blood, but it kind of gave you a hint that this was someone who would be fine with cutting up other people, especially seen by how he recognized that Manji's sword has seen a lot of blood. So I did like how it was primarily focused on Rin and her resolve to find peace, at least with one person, because she didn't want this child to suffer. And then in comes Manji for the finishing blow, because it makes sense. Like, unless she did get a sneak attack in on this guy, she shouldn't have the skills capable of killing someone unless they want to be killed. So her throwing her knife, things like that, if that would have landed him in the heart or anything that would have at least pushed him back, yes, she might have been able to kill him. But the fact that he got the jump on her means that we needed Manji. Like, it's not like she was useless. She actually drove this episode forward, and I think anyone who has maybe been a little more iffy on her participation in this series probably will enjoy what Rin did in this episode, or at least that's what I'm predicting, because I've been fine with what Rin has been doing up to this point, but this really seals the deal that I think she's going to have an interesting character arc throughout this journey. Something I did notice in this episode in comparison to the past 5 was that there was actually a lot of new types of shots and how they would frame a scene in this episode. Like, there was one moment where they would basically talk about the freedom and they would have a bird on a ledge and things like that. There was just a lot of like interesting but subtle but not really overly important details in the visual department, but it was enough to add on to the characters talking. And those are the little details that I like with anime, where they frame a shot in such a way to really capture what they are talking about, that should it just be a basic shot of looking a character dead in the eyes, it wouldn't have that same impact. But having it a little more far out and zooming in and having imagery and just objects or animals to kind of add on to the themes at play, it actually does add quite a bit to the narrative, at least for someone like myself. Maybe not a lot of people care about those details, but for me, it does show me that, you know, there's actually thought going into the shot composition and things like that within this series. And like I've mentioned before, I definitely think that the director is passionate about this adaptation and he's doing the best with what he can do. I think this is probably just going to be a 1-season anime. If it does get more, that would be excellent, but it does seem like he wants to give it his all in what he can do with the time given, and I do appreciate that. But obviously, like I've mentioned, I can understand if it's not the ideal adaptation for a lot of manga readers, but just something that I have been appreciating. There's a lot of finer details that does show me that this director does care about this project, and he's doing the best with what he can do. But obviously, you don't have to just like something because a director is very passionate about it. It's obviously make your own conclusions, but it's just something that I have been appreciating with this adaptation. It does seem like they're kind of going like a volume per episode, and I know that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but just based on if you're wondering what an anime only is thinking, I do feel like I understand these characters' motivations, and I understand like the pacing. At times I'm like, okay, yeah, you can definitely tell they sped past it, but episodes like these to me were really tight. Now granted, this could could have been the fastest paced or the slowest paced episode in comparison to the source material. But as an anime only, I don't feel like my experience is being lessened or anything like that. Now, at some point, maybe I will read the manga, but just to give clarity, because I know a lot of people are being like, man, they skimmed over a lot of this stuff, but just for me, I do feel like I understand these characters. But of course, if you've read like 30 volumes of manga, I could understand why maybe this isn't your ideal adaptation, but this definitely is something I've been enjoying quite a bit, and hopefully this was an episode that really properly adapted it and gives more people faith in this adaptation. But I guess only time can tell. You can let me know your thoughts, obviously, in the comments, either if you've read the manga. I'm actually especially interested in people who have. Are you enjoying this adaptation with at least this episode or across the board? Because this does feel like a lot tighter pace for me, but granted, this could have adapted 3 volumes for all I know. I have no idea. I'm very ignorant in this because I don't read it, so I would appreciate for anyone who's either been iffy on this anime or have completely loved it, whether you've read it or haven't read the manga, what did this episode do to you? Because I thought this was a great episode myself and probably the tightest paced and visually interesting episode to date, but granted, I could be in the minority as I have been with enjoying this anime up to this point. So let me know what anyone is feeling down in that comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and also hit that subscribe button if you have been new. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.